Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Burdick, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. Transforming cards are an iconic part of Innistrad, and since we're about to visit the plane again with Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow, I thought this would be a great time to look at some of the more memorable examples of this mechanic. But first, let me thank Into the AM for sponsoring today's video. They've got everything you need to transform your own wardrobe just in time for your next F&M. Into the AM has super cool graphic tees, like this one, and a huge color palette for their line of basics, which makes it easy to find a shirt that matches your favorite deck. Get a great deal when you grab them in a bundle, and use the link down below to automatically get an additional 10% off your entire order. They're tailor-fitted, super soft, breathable cotton, and guys, trust me, I live in Texas, and these shirts have saved my summer, okay? I wear them all the time. So get yours today, and then let me know what you think. All right, now let's transform and roll out. Oh wait, no, that's the wrong Hasbro franchise. Sorry. Our first visit to Innistrad way back in 2011 introduced transforming cards with 21 total, spread unequally between the 5 colors of Magic. Red and green got the most, as those were the colors of the werewolf tribe, perhaps the most iconic transforming monsters in Gothic horror, but each color got a chance to put their spooky spin on things. And perhaps in an effort to reduce complexity on this new mechanic, most of the cards retained their initial color after undergoing transformation, but I'm going to start by looking at one that did not. That's Cloistered Youth, which starts out as a 1/1 white human for 2 mana and transforms into a black 3/3 horror. The interesting thing about this one is that it requires no outside help to transform. The only condition that has to be met is the passage of time, which makes this a great expression of the set's themes. Terrible things are everywhere on Innistrad. Even an innocent-looking little girl can contain a horrible secret, and the color change from white to black really captures the pressing darkness this plane is known for. But as much as I like the flavor behind this one, it was Delver of Secrets who became one of the defining cards of the transform mechanic. Upgrading your 1-mana 1/1 into a flying 3/2 lets you rule the skies as early as turn 2, and being that it's a common, this little wizard is a pauper format powerhouse, where it's very easy to set up the top card of your deck and ensure that the transformation takes place. The scientist turning into a bug is a reference to The Fly, among other classic body horror films. But the story doesn't end here. The stakes were raised in Shadows over Innistrad 5 years later, with Aberrant Researcher, who reached his perfect form. Now, to tell a really good story, you usually need 3 acts, so the finale came in Eldritch Moon, where our humble little wizard was corrupted by the Eldrazi influence as he shared his findings with other citizens of the plane. The narrative thread that connects these 3 cards, or 6 depending on how you want to count them, is fantastic. Power and toughness are preserved as new abilities are added, culminating in a final iteration that starts the whole cycle anew, producing 1/1 human wizards that then become flying 3/2s. Which are apparently still around, as we're now back at the top of the batting order, with Delver of Secrets being reprinted in Midnight Hunt. Anyway, Screeching Bat flaunted its ability to transform back and forth at will, something Cloistered Youth and Delver of Secrets could only dream of. For 4 mana, you could pick whichever side worked better for you on a given turn. Keep the evasive 2/2, or smash in with the much bigger 5/5 on the ground. The choice is yours, which fits with the in-control status of the vampire elites. So we've got some cards that transform just once, and some that you can flip back and forth for a cost, but the real stars of the show were the werewolves, caught between the day and night cycle, made all the more intense by the brilliant silver moon of the plane. The werewolves of Innistrad all started out as humans in either red or green. The red ones were usually loners and outsiders, people who were isolated by choice. Village ironsmith probably tended the forge all day without so much as an apprentice at his side, and then, like the flavor text tells us, at night he would abandon civilization entirely, only to return the next day and repair his own front door. Reckless waif admits she's alone, but says she's not scared because she knows how easy it is for her to switch from snatching your purse to taking your whole arm. The green werewolves, in contrast, were hermits and outcasts, people isolated by circumstance. Grizzled outcasts, for example, clearly made regular townsfolk feel uneasy, and they should, since they turn into a 7/7, the biggest werewolf from this visit to the plane. Regardless of size, cards in the werewolf tribe all shared the same transformation trigger. If a turn passed with no spells being cast, it was symbolically nighttime and the wolves would emerge. Then, if a turn passed with 2 or more spells being cast, it was symbolically daytime and the human side would return. To help control the somewhat unpredictable transforming nature of the werewolves, the set also gave us Moon Mist, an instant that forcibly turned your humans into their more powerful form, but would do the same for your opponent. The moon giveth, and the moon taketh away. Innistrad also gave us the game's first transforming Planeswalker with Garruk Relentless. After he loses enough loyalty to break his spirit, the curse of the Chain Veil takes hold and turns him from a noble hunter into a heartless killer. Now, you might have noticed that I've been very careful to avoid using the word flip when describing any of these transforming cards, although you do in effect flip them over to their back side when the right conditions are met. That's because within Magic, flip cards are technically a different mechanic, which we saw in the Kamigawa block. In many ways, these were the precursors to the transforming cards of Innistrad, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some reference to them when we return to the plane for Neon Dynasty next year. Anyway, back over to Innistrad, where I'm going to still try to avoid saying flip as we head into Dark Ascension, which added a few twists to transforming cards. Loyal Cathar was another 2-mana white creature that became a black one after transforming, but this was the first one to be triggered by death. This theme will be expanded upon in Midnight Hunt, where the Disturb mechanic lets you cast transformed creatures from your graveyard, opening up all kinds of cool new designs. Dark Ascension also gave us our first transforming artifacts, with Chalice of Life becoming Chalice of Death, and the #1 card Commander players wish counted as a legendary creature in all zones, Elbrus the Binding Blade, who becomes the demon Wivengar once it samples the blood of another player. Avacyn Restored was the third set in the original Innistrad block, and it had no transforming creatures, because by this point in the story, the werewolves had become the Wolfir, which locked them into their animal state, where they then fought alongside their human friends and family. So, thanks to the foundation built by Kamigawa's flip cards, and the improved printing and packaging technology developed through another Wizards of the Coast game called Duel Masters, the transform mechanic made up a huge part of Innistrad, but it didn't end there. 4 years later, Magic Origins would tell the stories behind 5 of the game's most prominent Planeswalkers, taking us from their early days as mere legendary creatures up through the moment their sparks ignited. Gideon, Jace, Liliana, Chandra, and Nissa each got a mythic rare card that started out on the creature side but could transform into their planeswalker side, with a slight modification to the rules in that they had to be exiled in between so that they would enter the battlefield with their necessary loyalty counters. With this cycle, Wizards of the Coast proved transformation wasn't exclusive to Innistrad, though it would be another year before we saw more. And they happened to be on Innistrad again. What happened in Shadows over Innistrad is a story for another time, but we can look at a few of these standout cards and see how the mechanic has changed since our last visit. Abyssinian Missionaries is not super impressive as just a 3/3 for 4 mana, but when you give it a piece of equipment, it transforms into a 4/4 that exiles an opposing creature, which is quite good. This is supposed to be a sort of Ghostbusters top-down card. When given the right tools, they're able to deal with supernatural threats. I mean, it even fits the song. Who you gonna call? Lunarch Inquisitors! See, perfect match. Anyway, Startled Awake starts out as a sorcery that mills your opponent for an unlucky 13 cards, and then you can put it from your graveyard onto the battlefield transformed, which is pretty similar again to how Disturb is going to work in Midnight Hunt. Where it gets interesting though is that the transformed side is a creature that can return itself to your hand, where it becomes a sorcery again. And this is an important thing to point out. Transforming cards are double-faced cards, right? They effectively have two fronts and no back. The modal double-faced cards from Zendikar Rising, Kaldheim, and Strixhaven appear similar as they also have no back, but there is an important difference. With transforming cards, you always can only play the true front side from your hand. That's the only side the game rules recognize. With modal doubles, you have the option of which side you want to play. That's what the modal part means. So Startled Awake is a little clunky, but it was pushing the envelope by being both a sorcery and a creature that had self-synergy, well before true modal double-faced cards were available to players. Accursed Witch is cut from similar cloth. She starts out as a creature that actually encourages your opponent to target it with spells, but then punishes them for doing that by transforming into a curse that will slowly drain the life out of them. I feel like the original Innistrad block played it safe with the transforming cards, but our return to the plane gave designers a chance to really show off what this technology could do, which gave us a lot of these fun and interesting mashups. Like Autumnal Gloom. It's a green enchantment with a black activated ability, and it transforms when you have Delirium, a mechanic that looks for 4 or more types of cards in your graveyard. Figure out how to make all that work, and you end up with a pretty affordable 4/4 hexproof Treefolk with Trample, which is still plenty scary to face, even in a world full of things in the ice. The set also introduced us to Arlen Cord, a werewolf planeswalker, and while the art on her card did show both sides of her affliction, for me this one didn't really tell a story quite like Garrick had done with his card. I was more excited by Westvale Abbey, our first transforming land. Sacrifice 5 creatures, and you get to turn it into Ormondal, a legendary demon, and thus probably the second most requested card to always be considered a legendary creature by Commander players. By the time we reached Eldritch Moon, the Eldrazi influence was visible everywhere you looked, but I actually just want to point out 2 things here. First, notice that the werewolves no longer transform based on the established night is no spells, day is 2 or more system. Instead, they each require a payment of mana, which upgrades them from Werewolf Horror into an Eldrazi werewolf. They then become locked on that side with no way to transform back. With one exception, this was true for every transforming card in the set, not just the werewolves. In a way, it made things feel more dire for Innistrad. Like the cards themselves were confirming that the events here were so significant there would be literally no going back to the original image of the plane, the one everyone fell in love with back in 2011. I did mention one exception though, and that was Ulrich, the overdue werewolf legend, whose alpha status made him immune to the Eldrazi influence, but he still left a lot of fans of the tribe unsatisfied. Fortunately, his successor in Midnight Hunt is closer to what they're looking for. The second thing I want to talk about is actually what I consider to be a variation on Transform, and that's Meld. There were 3 pairings of cards that had this ability, which might make it one of the smallest standard set mechanics of all time, but basically, if you owned and controlled both of the ingredient permanents, you could exile them and return them to the battlefield in their melded form. Again, not technically transforming, but it was worth adding to this video just for how weird it was, and for how perfectly it captured the idea that the Eldrazi were changing things forever as they corrupted everything on the plane, from angels all the way down to rats. At the time, we weren't sure if we would ever see Innistrad again. In the story, the heroes did manage to, I'll say, contain the Eldrazi presence, but that didn't necessarily mean we would get to revisit and see if there were any lasting side effects. As it turns out, spoiler, Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow are going to explore the aftermath of Emrakul being trapped in that moon. But before we can talk about that, we have a little more history to discuss. That's because in 2017, transforming cards finally reached a plane other than Innistrad, and that's Ixalan. Exploration was a major theme in this set, so all of the transforming cards turned into lands. There was a cycle of legendary enchantments that became legendary lands, each of which could make mana in the matching color and do another effect. Or in the case of the green one, just make even more mana. And then there were the artifacts. Conqueror's Galleon transformed from a massive ship into a trading post set up on the shores of a distant land. Treasure Map would eventually lead you to Treasure Cove, and the Primal Amulet could unlock the power of the Primal Wellspring, potentially doubling your instants and sorceries. Rivals of Ixalan continued the pattern with another cycle of legendary enchantments, this time multicolored, that would transform into lands able to produce mana of any color, while also having a second, or in some cases third, ability related to the front face's original colors. All in all, I consider these to be a half step between the mostly creature-to-creature transforming cards of Innistrad and the modal double-faced cards of Zendikar Rising that give you the option of being a land or creature right from your hand. Core Set 2019 had a single transforming card in it, which showed the Elder Dragon Nicol Bolas igniting his spark and becoming the scheming Planeswalker we all know and love. In that way, it was a throwback to the cycle from Magic Origins, and it keeps the door open for more such cards moving forward. But first, we have to survive another visit to Innistrad. Midnight Hunt brings us Werewolves once again, this time connected to the Daybound Nightbound mechanic, which is going to force them all to transform at the same time and keep them in sync as the game progresses. This seems like a pretty clean upgrade from the original mechanic, and I'm excited to see how it plays out, especially because it still leaves room for other transforming cards that aren't bound by the day and night cycle. What about you? Which transforming card, new or old, is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're down there, make sure you check out that link for Into the AM and get yourself some spooky new threads, man. Then give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya.